So we have to be super, super careful and become more intentional about our lives than the industries who are trying to sell us this technology. They're not making YouTube Kids because they love your kids. They're making YouTube Kids so that they'll be addicted to YouTube. They don't put parental controls on those devices because they are safe. They put them on there so you'll buy them.
Welcome, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and today we have with us Doug Smith, the author of the book Unintentional, and we are going to be talking a little bit about, well, the point of this podcast. How can we love God and use tech? So, Doug, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Nathan. It's great to be here today.
And Doug, would you just run us through a quick introduction? Like, who are you? How did you get to the spot where you wrote this book? And tell us a little bit about the work you do.
Absolutely. Glad to. Yeah. Well, I wear a lot of hats, as many of us do. But most importantly, I'm a Christian. I'm a husband. I'm a dad to 4 now grown daughters. And we're empty nesters, happy empty nesters, but we love all our daughters and super proud of them. And I'm a lifelong software developer. I've been a software developer. It's bumping up against 30 years now, which is hard to even say out loud because time flies. And I've been a lifelong Bible student. And then, recently it's been about 2.5 years now that I wrote this book called Unintentional: How Screens Secretly Shape Your Desires and How You Can Break Free. And so, I wear all those hats, and I have a day job that I work for a company called Covenant Eyes, which is a company that's involved with internet pornography filtering and accountability. And so I do that. That's my day job. But then I love to speak and share this message of how do we navigate screens as Christians in our screen saturated world.
And that's exactly what we want to talk about today. I want to start in like 3 different places. So I'm going to start here. 30 years of software development.
Yes.
Which is going back to, early days of software development. I was actually
Yes.
trying to explain to my 8-year-old yesterday. I was like, buddy, the internet came out when I was in like 6th grade.
Right.
Like,
it hasn't been there that long.
This isn't
really.
normal. And even like 10 years ago, wireless internet was kind of mind-blowing still.
It was.
The idea, it wasn't as good. It didn't connect all the time. Your printer would never print.
Right.
So in 30 years, you've seen a lot of development. I guess I would like to start with, why then did you write about tech in this book? When talking about unintentional, it seems like 30 years dedicated to tech, you'd be like, no, let's intentionally use it. What's kind of the concept behind unintentional, and why write about tech at this point?
Yeah, that's a great question because, you're right. I've essentially grown up with it. Like all of us have. I do have a longer memory and more experiences than most of us, than many, I'm sure many of your listeners. But yeah, I have loved technology as a kid, so when you talk about technology, that's the thing. It's such a broad word, right? Yes. You'll read some books and like, well, we invented technology with the shovel and with the pen and with the printing press, okay, I get it. And so, my education is in electronics engineering. And so I've always loved figuring out how stuff works technically. But what started challenging me is that as in the work I would do, I was in consulting. So I had lots of exposure to lots of different kinds of work, especially got involved with some marketing and advertising work. So I started learning how that kind of worked from behind the scenes. But really with the 2007 introduction of the smartphone, and I've always been kind of a late adopter from that standpoint. I'm not a cutting edge techie guy. I admire it, but I also, I have kids, and I always have, we've always had battles with kids in tech for, not just since the smartphone, right? But when the smartphone came out, so I was like, I got my first smartphone in like 2010, and I was already watching people. This is different, that I saw other things and people get, addicted, but it was more a fringe and more excessive use. But when the smartphone came out, it was like everybody. It started. What is going on here? And so then when I got mine, I started getting it. Wow, I'm thinking about this all the time. What is going on here? And then, so over time, I started learning more and more about what is really going on behind the scenes that makes it so attractive and so obsession forming and so on. And around 2014, I really felt an impression from God in prayer that I needed to write down what I'd been learning and studying, because I've been reading it and praying about it and had lots of notes, and I took a leap and decided what ended up becoming a 2.5 year journey of writing, of doing this book, the research and the production of it. So.
Yeah. And it's an amazing conversation.
It is.
Unintentional does a great job. I mean, it's laid out with this concept of so is in kind of brackets. And then it's the idea of how are we unintentional? How do we become intentional? And then it walks through, oh man, I don't remember, 16, maybe different ones, unengaged. And it's excellent. I really love the way you do that. I want to take a quick aside before I dive further into that. Sure. You mentioned you work for Covenant Eyes, which is a company that's been life-changing for me. I want to say I was in college. It was back when Covenant Eyes still had Job, Job Bible verse on the splash page.
Job 31:1.
Yeah. And so I made a covenant with my eyes to not look lustfully at a woman, I believe is the phrase used there.
That's right.
And so that's in college. I discovered it. Me and some friends, we were going through a group called Lust Free Living at the time, and Covenant Eyes has been impactful, and one that I've strongly encouraged, especially adults, to say, hey, like there always needs to be a second set of eyes looking at whatever you see online. I mean, but you just mentioned 2007, the smartphone came out. And so Covenant Eyes has been on this leading edge, and along with other great products, there are other products out there, but Covenant Eyes is one. Bark is one that uses for kids, right? For kind of more than just image, but like text-based searching. Sure. What has that been like as a software developer and on the front end of what we would call tool tech, right? So if you mentioned people use this word tech for everything. Yeah. Like a hammer tied to a rock tied to a stick is a hammer. That's tech. So in this, you have tool tech stuff that helps us create. So we're creating accountability in this case versus drool tech where we're consuming. So we want accountability on our technology. How has your development side kind of progressed since 2007 and the introduction of this, I mean, really distraction delivery device? It's not a smartphone, but distraction delivery device doesn't sell quite as well. It doesn't. That's a great,
I love that though. That's totally what it is. The drool tech. Those are excellent metaphors. Well, it's very interesting. I mean, I've been a fan of Covenant Eyes for years. It was impactful to me and many men that I have walked with over the years in terms of overcoming pornography. And so I've only worked for Covenant Eyes though for just 2 years. So I'm a recent, but I'm their lead Android developer. So I focus on the client side technology that's involved with that. It's amazing being on the inside, understanding the complexities and the difficulties. It's a true battle. It is we really see, because the industry on the other side, especially the pornography industry, is trying everything it possibly can to get around it. And then users who are trying, if you're in the thick of an addiction and you're like fighting it, they fight us. Right. So we have to be good, and we have to do our job well. They're counting on us. So it's then you have the vendors. You have the Apple and Google, primarily on the smartphone side, that are not necessarily friendly to apps like us either. Yeah. So it's a real challenging, interesting field for sure.
Which brings me to, so that's an awesome segue, because first of all, parents, when I've talked on this podcast, when I talk in the live talk, when I talk in the online workshop, I will tell you, do not get an iPhone for your child. We'll talk about, because the next thing I'm going to ask you here is when we talk about which tech and when, Doug. So just mentally prepare. That's where we're headed. But parents, we'll talk about, hey, when should I get a smartphone, et cetera. And as we have that conversation, I try to be as clear as possible. And I want to say it again right now. Get your child an Android-based device. So the company I always encourage is Samsung. I don't know what Doug can say because of his alliances, but Samsung's great because it's not Google. So they're not running their entire company based off your data. And it's not Apple, who hates accountability. They blame it on security and privacy, but what they do is hate accountability. And it's the reason I'm saying that, parents, is because it's impossible through apps to actually have a fully accountable device. Your computers can be, even your smart TV can be, but your phone can't be if it's an iPhone. So think about that. People are buying back smartphones right now at premium dollar. You will lose like $50, and that's really, really cheap counseling. When you look at the big picture, get an Android device. So Doug, bringing that full circle then, one of the questions I get most is, hey, Nathan, what devices and what technology should I allow my kid to use? So usually they're talking drool tech, because very few parents are like, ooh, should I allow my child to use Microsoft Word? Like, I don't have a lot of pushback on that, but they want to know, hey, video games, social media, streaming services, in all of these, and then smartphone is kind of lumped in. What tech should I give my kid access to and when? So since this is something that's in your wheelhouse, I'm going to throw that question to you. And you can take it as, I guess, as broadly or as narrowly as possible. But generally we're talking, let's say 3 to 13 is kind of our age range of most of these parents asking, because after 13, most parents are like, hey, we're doing it in the next year, right? Like 14, 15, 16, 17, at some point that phone and device and freedom is coming.
Sure.
For most parents who haven't had that conversation already. So let's back it up. What would you say to a parent who asks that?
That's a great question. It's a different world for parents. The level of peer pressure to go along with what is being sold is overwhelming. So that's like, you have this sense as a parent, like, I got to have some kind of limits. I can't just be like, Johnny down the street where parents get them everything and they see the effect. They see that somebody's got all the drool tech in the world. It's not good. You look at that kid and they want to do nothing else. They're truly addicted. So what I do one of my talks I do is called Screens and Kids, a Countercultural Way. And what does this countercultural mindset look like? And then as soon as you say that, you're like, what, you want me to be a Luddite? You want me to be Amish, and move out in the field and do nothing but, grow corn? And no, it's okay.
Weave my own clothes.
Right. And no, certainly not. But really the perspective that I like to come at it with is, what are we doing as parents? And as parents, what kind of a world are we raising our kids to live in at a high level? And so I'm trying to set the context, because people like want an answer, 5. Yeah. Get them Facebook when they're 5. No, but I can't. I'm going to want to start by setting this more broad context. Yeah. What kind of a world are we raising our kids to be in a world that is primarily, we should kind of look at it as a theme park where, gosh, the goal of life that I want you, little Johnny, little Susie, I want you to be happy. I just want you to enjoy life. I want you to get as much fun as you possibly can, and just enjoy life. Or are we, and that's kind of obvious with the way I don't even intonate that, or are we raising our kids to live in a world that's essentially a battlefield, where there's a real battle for our hearts and minds in the world, and there always has been a battle for our hearts and minds. Obviously, that's where I'm going as a Christian, especially. You look at the Bible and you read, we're in a battle. There's a prince of the power of the air. That's a thing, and Jesus did not deny the power of the enemy as when he had his temptation in the wilderness. All authority is given to me, and I will give it to whoever I want to, if you'll just bow down and worship me. And that was the temptation of Jesus. Right?
Yeah, and you're referencing like when Satan takes Jesus out, and his response isn't, you don't have that authority. He simply goes, no, I worship only the Lord, right? Like,
yes,
that's yeah.
So we face that. People have always faced that. However, I would say that the drool tech, especially, to use your term there, has never been more effective in participating in this battle for our hearts and minds. So we have kids that are going to be raised in a world that's a battlefield for their hearts and minds. What kind of context does drool tech fit? So that's one thing to think about. Then the other thing to think about that a lot of times the other thing is people expect you to just say, no, don't do anything. No. All my answers is no. Doug, what's your answer? No. No, that's not, because the problem is that doesn't really work long-term, because the kids are always looking, well, why? So the why is, we have a better yes. What are we here for? So what is the purpose of our lives here? Like, if the purpose isn't just to have as much fun as we possibly can, not that we have no fun, obviously, but if the purpose is we have to be warriors in a battle, that means we got to discover what your gifts are and work on those gifts. You're here. Did you know that you are the only person that can do what you are gifted to do in this battle? Your friends, your friends' hearts and minds, they're going to be there. If they're not being raised in a family that is concerned enough to listen to a podcast like this, then they're probably just going to be addicted to everything, and they're going to need your help. And, or, maybe you're really gifted in medicine. Maybe you're gifted in, in sports, and you can help inspire people. Maybe you're gifted in all these kinds of things. So we as a family are on mission, and primarily we as a family are on mission. Ultimately, as Christians, we're on a mission to make disciples. That the Great Commission is our co-mission. That's the mission, right? But then we all have under that, our family has a special thing. Your family has a very special thing. You and your family are doing gospel tech, and your kids will participate in whatever way that as they grow, right? And every child needs that understanding that, what, you are so gifted at that, at these different things, that we can't have anything in our lives that would take away from you becoming the best at that you possibly can. And the key is to try to inspire that desire within them, so they start wanting it. I've heard of kids who, where their parents delayed the device, an introduction of some tech that all their friends had, and the kid has told his parents, after a period of time, "Mom, thanks for giving me an imagination. Thanks for giving me the space to be able to create." One of the stories I tell in my book is that when I was working on my book in library, and I looked up, and there was this really happened. There was probably a 10-year-old boy, and his mom was sitting there. The mom was reading a paper book, and the boy was doing paper. I assume they were kind of homeschooling, and all of a sudden he just looked out the window, and there's this beautiful view at this. It's a really beautiful library in Brentwood, Tennessee, where we used to live, and it's a really, really nice area. So he looks out, and there's a fountain, and there's trees, and there's birds, and he was just his mouth opened up in what I recognize as wonder. He got lost in the wonder of it all. And the thing that hit me even just in that little moment of that story is that mom gave him a gift that day, and that gift was no screens. Because had he been on a screen, he wouldn't have even known he was in the library. He wouldn't even known where he was. He would have been in that virtual world. All right. So now I've got all this context, right? So I've definitely not answered your question yet. But
I think, hold on, if I can pause right there, because parents, this is so important, right? When you come and you want an answer of well, just tell me what I should give my kid, Nathan. That's been the recurring refrain. And I totally get it, because you are living in the trenches with your kids, and you're getting hammered with this question.
Right.
Even if your kids aren't asking, it's showing up on social media. It's showing up in your friend group. It's showing up from school. It's showing up from the schools themselves they're asking you to bring home these devices or do work from home, from ads, from every direction. And you have this just question inside of am I being a good parent? So let's start with the context that Doug just gave us of we just need to remember what our context is. We're children of the Lord. Our kids are not our I guess, projects to fix.
Right.
There are people to love that we've been given. And out of that, we remember, all right, we can best love them by being children of God ourselves, and by reminding our children of their identity in Christ. And that now gives us a platform to have this tech conversation. So Doug, where do we take it from there?
Yeah, excellent. That's a great way to reframe it. Thank you. So from there, we have to be really careful. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to understand what we're facing. And part of the reason that I called my book Unintentional is that there's this idea of what I call an intentionality imbalance, where the industry is very intentional about making their products addictive, obsession forming, habit forming.
Yeah.
Most of us are unintentional with our use. So again, people listening to this podcast are probably more intentional than most, but still, when you talk about the average toddler having 90 minutes a day on a screen, when you can look up car seats that have a mount for an iPad in the car seat, you're like, really?
It hurts my brain.
Yeah, it hurts my spirit big time. So this is the world we live in. And why do they do that? Because they're super intentional about how we spend our time. And they know that if they can hook our kids, it's just like a drug dealer. That's why the drug dealers hang around the schools, because they know if they can hook you the younger they hook you, the more those addictions are entrenched.
Yeah.
So we have to be super, super careful and become more intentional about our lives than the industries who are trying to sell us this technology. They're
Ooh,
not
I like
making
that.
YouTube Kids because they love your kids. They're making YouTube Kids so that they'll be addicted to YouTube. They don't put parental controls on those devices because they are safe. They put them on there so you'll buy them.
Yeah.
And think, oh yeah, it's parental controls. It's
Yeah.
safe. No, it's not. It's so yeah, you've got to be so at the end of the day, there's very little drool tech that is appropriate for that age, is what I would say. I'm a ambassador for an organization called Screen Strong. It's
Yeah.
another kind of relationship that I have that is a part of this whole effort of mine to try, just like you are, spreading the word.
Yeah.
And their Screen Strong's really a great resource for the brain science behind what's going on with kids and screens. They've got some of the top people. One of them is Dr. Douglas Gentile, who's done kind of a world-renowned researcher on the effect of video games on the brain.
He's for real. And he's been on it since like the late 90s.
Right. And he came in, I got to hear him at a conference in Charlotte. It was a really great series of talks he gave, and learned that he was a skeptic going into it. He just had all these, he's an academic. And he had all these people saying, my kid's addicted to video games in the 90s.
Yeah.
And they're not addicted. You don't know the clinical definition of addiction. They're not, he's poo-pooing it. But he did the research, and this is research. This is like long-term longitudinal studies with lots of big groups of kids. And he's truly, he got gaming disorder on the list of the WHO's list of the official disease list, whatever they call that.
Yeah. It's the, I wish I could remember. Yeah. So WHO, everyone, is the World Health Organization.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which the US didn't include it in, was it DSM 6?
Yeah.
And I believe the statement I saw was, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's, I'm not exaggerating. I'm paraphrasing. I'm condensing it. It was, most of the studies are done in Asia. Is their explanation for why they're not accepting in the United States this diagnosis. So anyway, that's one of my personal favorites for.
Oh, don't you love that?
Why we're not dealing with this, that, and when, okay. Anyway. Yeah. I digress. So Gentile gave these talks, ambassador for Screen Strong.
So yeah, the reason I'm saying that is that what we know now, and we're just learning, but the effect of, again, drool tech on kids' brain development is really, really serious. It's not hopeless by any means. Nothing. I'm a very optimistic, but at the end of the day, it changes your neural pathways. It changes, the longer, the more. We know this, though. We've known this forever, that like if you learn a language when you're a child, it's going to stick with you. If you take piano lessons, it's going to stick with you. If you learn sports or whatever, these kind of things are wired in because God made us to learn when we're kids. If you spend X amount of time, I'm not going to say the time, but you spend X amount of time because, as soon as you give a number, then the parents check, okay, but because every kid's different, you can't, it's not a one size fits all. Right. But it is a very small size for everybody, especially in that age group. And the reason is because their brains are under construction. They're magnificently designed to learn and to optimize for the things that they are doing, especially going into the teen years. And so that's where even I would push back even on the 14, 15, 16, because in the teen years is where our brains are like learning to decide, what am I going to keep and what am I going to throw out? Because we don't have the capacity. And they call it neuronal pruning, or synaptic pruning, excuse me. And in the synaptic pruning process, it's a use it or lose it mechanism. Like if you're optimized for playing video games, that's all you're going to do. And your life skill capacity is a lot lower in those situations, and it's tragic. So all that to say, we need to, so I would just encourage, what I would, I guess the next takeaway is, I would say, learn a lot before you just go along. Understand the real ramifications of this technology on your child's brain development. It's significant.
Yeah. Unintentional, by the way, everyone, is a great spot to start. I actually kept running through it. So I I have like a premise written for a book. I was like, someone should write this book. And then I found out that book is unintentional. That it's fantastic. I'm like,
Thank
great.
you.
Like these are, the last time I was reading oh my goodness, the study about rise in depression rates.
Oh, yes. Yeah. From
Yeah,
iGen, from
yeah, with
Gene Twenge.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, I saw that. I was like, yes, nailed it. All right.
Yeah.
Check that one off the box too. Like I have this filling in all my boxes. I can just reference this book now.
Yay. Great.
So thanks. You saved me a ton of time and work. Thanks for doing it. It's amazing. So with that though, I mean, because I can just hear parents like hair curling as they're listening to you, thinking about what they just bought their kid at Christmas. All right. They just bought that new gaming platform. They just bought that smartphone. They just bought that new smart TV. They just paid over COVID to get that entertainment room set up, right? So that they can have fun. So we have our kids in, yes, absolutely. Ages 3 to 12, right? Like this is sound advice. Know the research, look at what you're doing and make sure it's pushing you in the direction you want to go, that you're being intentional, right? That you're living in light of, does this help us do more of what God called us to do? If so, cool. If not, what should we be doing instead? Do you have any, because I'm going to ask you next about how do we know if it is a problem and see kind of what you say about that. But let's say, maybe I'll just ask you now and then we'll return to it. So with my kid then, like, how do I know if this is a problem? I've already given them the smartphone. I've given them this device. I understand that delaying is my best option, but I can't put that back in the toothpaste container, right? Like whatever that Sunday school analogy was, I was told about squeezing the toothpaste. It's not going back in. So a cat is out of the bag would be another analogy I could use. What do we do about knowing if this is a problem? Let's start. So how do I know? And then what can I do about it?
Yeah, great questions. What a lot of parents find when they especially giving them the smartphone, but the addictive video games as well, as you know very well, either one, is that dramatic personality change. Like, where'd my kid go? This is a different person. Likewise, parents who unwind, because you actually can, like if you've identified the problem, your child will come back. It may be a few weeks of literal withdrawals. But essentially some problem markers that I would look for are, is this the only thing they want to do? Did they used to have a lot of other interests, but now their very favorite thing in the whole wide world is to spend time on this device? They can't think of, like, hey, Johnny, what's your favorite thing? And what's your favorite thing to do? Video games? What else do you like to do? That's a high red flag. Johnny should have lots of interests. Susie should have lots of interests. They should be doing ballet and music and football and all the things. And they should love those things. And they should look forward to those things and not be like, they have to do these other things. There's a classic little cartoon. I'm sure you've seen it become a meme where it's like, I want you to go play outside, like kids on the video game inside. I want you to go play outside. And he takes the video game controller and he's outside in the window looking at the video game, standing outside playing the video game.
Out the window.
Out the window. Yeah. So he's outside. So I see this, I take a walk in my neighborhood and there's, a child on her front porch on her phone. Mom said, go play outside. Right. That's a problem. That they don't want to do anything else. That is, it's an addiction, and truly. So that would definitely look at that as some of the red flags.
Yeah. So those personality shifts, and then the heart focus shift of, where do you find your wonder? Where do you find your amazement? And and it sounds like you're saying, like, hey, if your kid enjoys video games, like, that's not the problem. If your kid uses social media, that's not necessarily the problem. The problem is what those things are designed to do. And this is a conversation we've had a lot on this podcast. And actually just a couple of weeks ago, me and my very nerdy brother-in-law had this big, long conversation, but about this idea of, video games aren't the problem. They're a vessel for adventure or amazement or whatever. And Tolkien is one of these people. And I bring him up because you reference him in your book. Tolkien loved this concept of fantasy and even escape, thinking of, it points our eyes to something higher. And the problem is when that amazement becomes kind of ingrown, right? That it starts to turn in on ourselves. And instead of developing our amazement by an order of magnitude. Like looking at the stars makes us realize how small we are, makes us realize, holy moly, like I have maybe 100 years, right? Like looking at those giant trees or anything in nature that makes us get that scale of like, oh, I'm not that big of a deal.
Yes.
I'm this itty bitty little speck whipping around on another little itty bitty speck through this massive ocean of energy and matter and, you know, cosmic design.
Sure.
So we have this picture then, parents, of it's not if your kid plays a video game, they're bad. If you play video games, you're bad. That's not the conversation. The conversation is, does it draw your heart more than God does? Because if it does, either video games are the problem or something else is off, and video games are just kind of symptomatic of what else is going on. And that it can lead to, as you just mentioned, Doug, very real physical and psychological complications and issues that will draw you away from where God wants you to be, which I mentioned the Tolkien piece. I want to then bring onto this. All right, we have this idea. Yeah, in your book, you tell the story from The Hobbit, which my boys are absolutely just enthralled with The Hobbit right now. We were listening to the audiobook yesterday. By the way, anyone, if you're into audiobooks, it's a cool form of tool tech because a professional reader does an amazing job. We listen to it on 0.8 because there's big words. So you go 80% speed.
Nice.
And he does an incredible reading. And the same guy does the Lord of the Rings, but the thing, what would you call it, language level of that is like out of this world high.
Yeah, a little higher.
Sentences are like 3/4 of a page.
Yeah, so there's multiple languages and all the things.
Yeah. It's like Paul writing in Ephesians. It's just a lot of commas and no end.
Right.
So in The Hobbit, though, you reference, all right, Bilbo's gone out with these dwarves and they've gone seeking treasure, and they end up waking up a dragon. And you compare that to the tech industry of, hey, there's some tech people and they're realizing, man, we were going out and we were going to go get rich. And this is what's needed for kind of that next big payday. And now they're starting to have some remorse that they may have poked a dragon. And I guess my question would be twofold. One, in what ways have we awoken a dragon? And two, I guess, where do you see the remorse, or where do you feel like there should be remorse if you don't see it? And in that kind of analogy.
Yeah, that's great. It's really interesting to watch that because because you're right. The people that kind of laid the foundation for some of the most behavioral modification intensive things in social media and video games. Just to kind of come back to that idea of comparing like video games, today's video games, especially to like Tolkien, that among the many differences, it's not the fantasy aspect, it's the behavioral psychology that's being applied to make them intentionally addictive. It's not.
Could you give us a specific, because I hear that and that's it absolutely true, right? And even the difference between Pong and what we're seeing now.
Oh, absolutely.
One of the concepts people are like, well, I played video games growing up. Like, you didn't play this. So could you give us an example?
Right. It's one of another friend that I met through ScreenStrong is Dr. Richard Freed, and he wrote a book called Wired Child. He's really cool guy. You got over there, yeah, great book. He said in an article that Fortnite, for example, has 200 specific psychological exploits in it. It said it's the talk of their psychology little group because it's fascinating. And oh, by the way, as a clinical psychologist, all like the 90+% of their cases now are coming in because of some kind of screen problem. Men, boys and girls. So it's the kind of a thing in terms of specifics examples. It's the we're never done. There's no way to actually finish. So we have this drive to completion. There's no completion. There's a drive to there's the variable rewards is one of the big ones that really manipulate our brains. So again, this is intentional. They write books on the subject. They publish articles on the subject, and they hide behind their lobbying groups that protect them from like the negative consequences of all that. But that's a whole other conversation. But so variable rewards is the casino. That's the casino thing, right? That's where I just might win if I just do this one more thing. Just one more thing. And you hear the child going, just a few more minutes. Yeah. It's never just a few more minutes. It's forever. Because it's designed for one thing. It's just to keep them playing more. And so, yeah, coming back to your, about the regret, you got these, these 20 something developers writing 8 hours a week, living on beer and pizza and what are they doing? They're iterating on their metrics. How long are people playing our game? How long are people staying on my social media platform? How much time? Oh, wait, they dropped off of Instagram after this many minutes when we didn't do that. Oh, add this. Oh, this works. They're doing thousands of experiments on us all the time to learn what works. The stuff that I talk about it in my book about how you can get how they learn. So they're doing this. Why are they doing this? Because you're right. They're going for the media. They're the big payday, right? We go public and we cash out. Then they're in their 30s and they're starting to have kids, and their kids are addicted to the technology that they created, or they're seeing other kids. Or the insidious part, as I also write in my book, is that a lot of these elite tech people, they have like Steve Jobs' kids did not use an iPad.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs' kids did not have an iPad. if you get nothing else out of this, and you're wondering like, he made a little bit of money on those iPads, selling them to us, but so it's that kind of a thing. They're either they're zero, like they're going to zero tech schools while they're selling them to our kids. Chromebooks in every school for us, but not for the Wharton school or whatever the giant, whatever the $10,000 a month school that they send their kids to, zero tech. So all that to say, as they see the ones that are writing about their regrets, the ones that are saying, what have we done? Like Bilbo says, what have we done? Those are the ones that are seeing it in their own kids and like, wow, maybe did we just mess up entire society? The quotes are really interesting when you look at that. I have a few of them in the book, but there's a few of them popping up here and there. They're like, huh. And there's one of them, a former Googler, his name is escaping me, Tristan.
Harris.
Tristan Harris, yeah, who left Google. He's kind of being an ethical voice within Google, but then he left Google to kind of found this, trying to add a bit of a conscience to the industry.
Yeah.
And I think he's a good voice there, but not, some of that kind of stuff to me comes off more as, I don't know how to say exactly, but basically, we got to give some lip service. Maybe we'll do a little donation over here to the,
Sure.
I make a lot of money selling alcohol.
Sure. Mistakes were made.
Yeah.
Sort of. Oops. We're not changing anything, but like we acknowledge that, like if we say this out loud, then your lawyers don't have a leg up because we acknowledge that it happened.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And even just hearing you explain that, I was having a conversation the other day I've been trying to process this very idea, and your book was really helpful in that. And parents, I believe many of you are in the same spot where we're looking at it going, okay, so much of what we're seeing in games and social media and streaming and the digital world is so familiar to us. Mm-hmm. And it's so much like the experience we had, but there's something off. And I think the example someone the other day was like, well, it's kind of like raising your kid with sugar, mm-hmm. Like sugar, we know it's not good for you, but like we all kind of figure it out. We all have our different limits, and it's probably mm-hmm. not reasonable to raise our kid with no sugar. And I was like, sure. It's kind of like that. Mm-hmm. I was like, but it's more like Coca-Cola. Yeah. I was like, and we're creating a product right now that still has the cocaine in it.
That's exactly right.
And we don't have any rules yet going, no, sugar's okay, mm-hmm. right? Even caffeine, which by the way, is addictive, mm-hmm. but there's a night and day difference between caffeine addiction and cocaine addiction.
That's right.
And we made a limit. We said, hey, listen, we get it. You want to sell your product. You want to do it. You cannot put cocaine in this product. It's not a trade-off worth having. And right now, I believe there's a lot of this drool tech coming out where what you mentioned, the behavioral psychology being used is convincing us we need stuff we don't want. Mm-hmm. There's absolutely no limit to how much we will pursue it. They call it, I love these two terms, user interface design. So UX design and engagement. Those are two of my favorite terms. Well, it's user engagement. Like user engagement means your focus, your time, and your money. That's what they're mm-hmm. trying to engage. That's right. That's user engagement. It isn't UX design. I feel like used to be like, how can we make this make the most sense to the user, right? Like mm-hmm. Microsoft Word, where are they going to find the save button? That's a user interface design, but it's been twisted to what you mentioned, variable rewards and all this stuff. And so I do think that's a really powerful conversation for us to be having, to recognize, hey, where in these products are there intentionally unhealthy designs, because that's how they're going to sell this thing. Right. And what would it look like for us? And I think this is the bigger question, maybe to kind of land on, that we don't have to answer today, but we can keep asking as parents and help our young people ask is, what would it look like to make many of these exact same products for the exact same purpose, but not make engagement the end goal, right? Engagement at all costs. What if we actually made these things without the cocaine in them and had them be engaging, had them be interesting, had them be accessible, but let people walk away at some point and be okay with that. And I think, this is a conversation for another day. Let's pin this, but I'm going to say it. Microsoft is going to pay upwards of $60 billion for Activision Blizzard. Parents, if you don't know what that means, it means one of the least sold game design companies of all time, meaning they make games built around a business structure and they release that game, whether it's a high quality product or not, and it sells billions of dollars. Versus along with a company that makes one of the most sold games of all times, which means they delay games for years and years and years. If it isn't adding up to their artistic expectation standards, those two have made an unholy alliance and are getting purchased by a $1 trillion company. It's not an accident. It's not because they like the game titles. It's because video games are the future of entertainment consumption and really of sports competition. And we need to recognize that. Microsoft doesn't just have billions to burn and this is like a hobby for them. They see the light at the end of the tunnel and they know where this is headed. This conversation isn't going anywhere. So keep that in mind as we think about how can we make games that have souls, right? Games that are doing their purpose of having big conversations and creating fun and drawing people together versus games that are just moving people through and eating them up and spitting them out, or never spitting them out and just churning them into dust and keeping the engagement thing going.
That's right.
But man, thank you so much for talking to us about your book. I guess my final question to really try to tie, especially my last little tangent there, down. Let's tether this for our families. What can parents do practically? What can they begin doing in their families? Based on your research, based on your writing, based on your book. Obviously, go read Unintentional, everyone. That's your to-do. But what's a practical takeaway we can do with our young people for the vast age range we have? I mean, we mentioned 3 to 12 is going to probably be different than 13 to 17, but what would be something you would encourage families to begin doing?
Well, I would say two things. First of all, I would give you a tremendous amount of hope. Is that often in this conversation, in fact, everything we've said, you think about everything that's leveled against us think about your little family. And honestly, writing this book, I often this is so big. What am I doing fighting these they weren't $1 trillion companies until just recently, but crazy big companies with these huge agendas powered by all this stuff. What can one family do? I can tell you can do a lot. I would first, as a Christian, I would say, greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. We have the reality that God is still bigger and still greater. And parents, even Douglas Gentile that was the other thing I took away from him, from a secular standpoint, one of the metrics as he has studied the effect of tech on kids is that the parents make a huge difference. That if a parent is involved and those limits change outcomes. So I give you the hope that if you will engage this battle and be willing to live counterculturally, it will matter. And your kids, I've told this to my wife all the time, the line from Proverbs 31, the kids will rise up and call you blessed. They will. Not today, not when they're teenagers, probably, Mom, they so-and-so has no, they won't today, but they will. Thank you. And so I will give you hope and encourage you to fight the fight for your kids' hearts and minds, whatever that looks like in your family, without giving you a recipe. But you do need to understand that there are things for you to learn. And so, books, this podcast, Screen Strong things, just all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of data out there. Sometimes people, I think, go, I don't even want to know. If I see no evil, close my ears, it's not that, can't be that bad. It is. But it's also, but if you know what you're facing, it's less scary. Like you might feel yourself, it's too scary, I can't learn. No, you actually, once you know it, any unknown fear is much scarier than a known adversary. And they truly, until they take the cocaine, that your metaphors are perfect. Until they take the cocaine out of these products, they are our adversary. They are hurting our kids, hurting our families. And let me just a quick aside. When I speak at homeschool conferences, I'll have at least one, maybe multiple women come up to my book, to my table or whatever afterwards and say, I get this about the kids. And I appreciate what you said about the kids, but what do I do about my husband?
Yeah.
You know, there, and I've had one woman in particular, she was just so sweet and she was in tears. I can't get my husband to, he's up till 4 a.m. playing video games every night after work. He says he needs it for his stress relief.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Oh man, that's you just
that's
opened a whole nother can. There are
sorry,
parents right now like yelling at their podcast in their car.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a real thing. But the same spot, right? Let's start with that hope in the gospel, and let's remind ourselves that like parents do matter, and that's why an unhealthy parent is worth fighting for, to get them healthy, so that they can be in this journey and in the conversation. And parents, we don't have to have this perfect. We can grow and be humble, and we can be kind, and we can be curious in the process.
Yes.
Oh, it's already been a year for me, and we're only 1 month in. Man,
so true, man.
Thank you so much, Doug, for being here. Everyone, I just want to remind you, this is Doug Smith. He wrote Unintentional, which is a book about how we can be intentional with our tech use, and how we can do that with the hope of Christ, for our kids, for ourselves, for our marriages. So thank you again, Doug, for being here with us.
Everyone, my pleasure, Nathan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Everyone, you can check us out. Again, you can go to gospeltech.net if you want more on this. He mentioned Screen Strong. They're amazing. Do check them out. I believe it's just screenstrong.com, right?
Yep, that's right.
People can find you is it that Doug Smith?
Yeah, that's it. I'm that Doug Smith. Obviously, it's a common name, right? So yeah, thatdougsmith.com.
And will they find your contact info, or is there another spot to reach out to you if they want to do that? Cool.
They'll find everything about me there. Yep.
Perfect.
They can contact me there, thatdougsmith.com.
Cool.
Absolutely.
All right. And then if you have any questions, you guys can reach out to me at nathan@gospeltech.net, and you can join us next week as we continue this conversation about how we can love God and use tech.